To introduce them as they come onto the stage, we have first Antje Boetius, who is the director of the Alfred Wegener Institute, and she is the chair of the Scientific Advisory Board for the Arctic Science Ministerial. Welcome. Please come on stage. She is the director, she is the chair. Both of you are welcome to come on stage, please. Thank you. Karen Lochte, of course, was the director of the Alfred Wegener Institute. Yes? Got them mixed up. But you know each other, you can work it out. Great, thank you. We have Per Rosing-Petersen, who is a political and industrial consultant and a guest lecturer at the University of Versailles, and was a member of Greenland's parliament. Per, welcome, thank you. Next, we have Lars Colorado, who is the president of the University of the Arctic, a cooperative network of 200 universities and institutions in and around the Arctic. He is also a geologist who worked at Grid Arendal in the 1990s. Welcome, Lars. And last but not least, Vyacheslav Shadrin, who is a research fellow at Institute for Humanities Research and Indigenous Studies of the North, and who is the deputy chairman of the Yakutia Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North. So we are talking now about the role of science, education, and indigenous knowledge in climate, society, and sustainability. And I'd like to start with a few specific questions for a few of you. First off, Karen Lochte, you were at the first Arctic Science Ministerial at the White House with Barack Obama. I'm curious, what has changed since that time? This was 2 years ago. What has changed since then, and what are your goals for this ministerial?
Okay, we have seen since the first ministerial that actually international collaboration is increasing. When you look at what has been submitted for this ministerial, there are many joint projects, bilateral, multilateral. We have new programs for exchange of students or scientists between countries. And we have these two big international flagships, which are like Mosaic, is one of them, and the other one, the Year of Polar Prediction. I think both of them really show that the scientific international community can work well together. And then another thing is, two more things. One more thing is that the ministers of the Arctic countries have signed actually a declaration saying that research should be open for international groups, so that we really have more possibilities to actually work in the Arctic. And last but not least, many countries have put a lot of money into Arctic research, building icebreakers, opening stations, so it becomes very much higher up in the agenda in many countries, even countries far away from the Arctic. So I think it has drawn a lot of attention to the Arctic, the first Science Ministerial. And I think the second one will do the same and even enhance that. And it is our big effort this time to actually come to some really concrete deliverables for the third Arctic Science Ministerial. So what can we do in the next 2 years to bring forward not just basic science, but also improvement for the people living there?
You mentioned something that I want to ask Antje about, and that... Well, how is the University of the Arctic fostering the perception of climate change in the Arctic and enhancing the knowledge base for sustainable development of the region?
Question. The key tool is, of course, to make universities and scientists work together, because everything gets better quality if we work together and share knowledge, rather than sit on each other hype somewhere. That's the key thing. Therefore, we want students to move, we want faculty to move and work and produce joint programs. In the Arctic we had some 50 different thematic networks, we call them, expert group working on many kind of aspects. But it goes from culture to education to hardcore science. And we need them all, because the teacher training for the people of the north, the teachers who trained at Samavik in Greenland or in Siberia, in Yakutia, or trained in northern Norway, they need to understand some of the same things. They need to have the similar stories to tell to the pupils. And we need better connection between them and the science. So that is the kind of things we do in University of Arctic, which is this collaboration between a little more than 200 universities all over the Arctic. But we also include non-Arctic members on an equal basis, so we are not like the Arctic Council, we and them, but it is all together.
And you've been with it since the beginning, right?
I've been with this for quite a while, yes, since 2002.
My next question for Pierre and Vyacheslav, mostly, I'm wondering from the discussions that we had before the break, we were talking about how the Arctic is a bit of a canary in the coal mine for climate change. I'm wondering how you personally have seen climate change manifest in your areas.
Yes, I'm actually born in Ilulissat, and if you look at the, there is some cameras showing how the ice body is moving. It has been moving several kilometers during the last 40-50 years, so it is something that is quite visible for us. We see it, like Slava also said, we can no more predict the weather like we used to do, and we can see how the ice cap is moving. We can see it in any ways. We can see how the biodiversity, the fish and the different kind of animals are moving because of the climate change. The polar bears are following the shields, and we can see the cods are coming further up north because the seawater is getting warmer. So we can feel in our way of living in Greenland, both as a fishermen and hunters, we can feel it every single day. So, as Slava also mentioned, we have to combine both the traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, with the scientific knowledge to gain and to get the most precise prediction on how it will be. A couple weeks ago, IPCC report came out and showed that it is going much quicker than we ever have expected. So it is extremely important that we have the scientific part of it, but we need to act. I have been to many conferences about Arctic, and I was in Norway. I was in Tromsø in January. And one thing I noticed is that somehow I got the idea that the participants mentioning sustainability every second time was somehow justifying the conference. We need action. We truly need action here and now. So there has to be a kind of a task force that that has to make a recipe how the rest of the world should act for the climate change.
What I want to say is that we say about climate change, we say about these challenges, and for us, for indigenous peoples, now is mainly all these challenges are combined in one. The main challenge for our existence of our indigenous peoples, because this climate change impact for our traditional activity. And in these conditions, our traditional activities start being unprofitable. We can't get enough income from it. And And that's why less and less our indigenous peoples are involved in this traditional activity. And it means that the base of our traditional knowledge, of our traditional culture, of our language, start to be more or less and less reduced. And this is maybe one of the challenges for our existence in the future. And we must think about it.
Do you think, for example, that there is more opportunities to involve indigenous people with scientific research or to create more collaboration there?
Yes, it's now maybe it's one of the main questions of our research. We see that last year with more and more indigenous scientists, keepers of traditional knowledge are involved in these projects. But sometimes, from my view, it's not enough. I call for all the leaders of some scientific projects maybe to think about it and try to involve more and more keepers of traditional knowledge of our indigenous scientists to this project. Because we must understand we are not only the object, we must be a subject of this process.
Can I comment a little? You pointed to me being old, so since I've been in the Arctic for so many years. And, many years ago, I had an employee who was a young lady who later became a minister in Norway. And she's a Sami, she's from northern Norway. And she asked me the question, why do I, as a minister, spend so much money on science in the Arctic? And why do my uncles, who are sheep farmers on the coast of Finland, or fishermen, never see any outcome of that research, or what they do? What is wrong? And of course you get a bit defensive when you're faced with such a question, because she gives you the money and she sees no outcome. Scientists, because they are closer to the real life of people. And that is the answer I give to her. That you need to shape up the others, and I will help you do so.
It looked like you were having some reaction to that. Do you have anything to add?
Actually, I wanted to add two things. So one thing is, when you think optimistic, of course we all want more and more urgent in action now, but I want to say that this Arctic Science Ministerial, have you considered, and I have really thought deeply about it, that I don't know of another event where so many ministers come to it? I mean, the Arctic is a huge problem, but so is peace and war, so is the combat of hunger, so is AIDS and Ebola. There is not an incident that I know of where so many different countries put ministers together for the second time in one place to discuss international collaboration, and all of the themes I've just mentioned need international collaboration, need communications, need infrastructure. So I would be happy that we also use this as a Kickstarter for doing more, doing it better, and being loud and also happy about it a little bit that this is happening. It's amazing. Think about it. no, not one single time in the history of research has such a mobilization of research managers been possible. And so I want foremost also to thank Karin and everyone involved making this happen, that we have it. It's much better than nothing. It's still not enough, but it's important to me to say thank you for everyone involved.
I think that the changes which we see in the Arctic is actually rising concern, and that's why people are paying attention and coming. It also means that quite a number of nations actually see economic chances. You know, the traffic through the Arctic Ocean is one aspect, but others as well. But the changes in the Arctic can't be solved in the Arctic. I mean, the temperature rise is something which the Arctic people are suffering from it, but they're not doing it. They're not the ones who are doing it. It's the rest of the world, especially the developed world. And so one of the big pleas actually is to say we have to do something, but worldwide, if we want to change what's happening in the Arctic. And the Arctic is suffering much more, because if we have a global temperature rise of 2 degrees, it will be 4 or 6 degrees in the Arctic. It will mean that sea ice is changing massively, and the Greenland ice sheet is really changing in shape and speed of melting, and that will have repercussions in the rest of the world. So people have to understand they are responsible for what is happening there, and they will feel it. And I think this is a message which we have to say.
It does seem like there's been so much attention from the IPCC report in the past few weeks in a way that perhaps other climate messages have not reached the general public. My question for you is, what needs to happen now?
In the Arctic, I think the most important things is to improve prediction, to know what's happening, especially if you have hotspots where you know things will be happening faster than in other regions. Prediction not only for weather, but also for biological changes, for instance, vegetation changes. And in order to do that, and that was already mentioned earlier, that we have to have better data. So I think both things go together. How can we bring this enormous amount of observations which are done everywhere into a more coherent system and make sure that the data are collected which we will need, and then on the basis of this data we will have to have better prediction capabilities. And this will be actually one of the messages which we will bring into the ministers, that we need a roadmap for consistent, coherent and long-term observations, and help to improve predictions.
There is maybe three things. First, doing better prediction, better observations and better understanding of processes, which you now will do, is essential, of course. But the most important is that Science Ministerial meeting unite the countries, which together, I don't know the number, is 70 or 80% of the cause of the problem. So they sit there with the solution. They can go home and fix it, simply. And probably they will not, but they could. And they have the power to do so. Then the third thing is that those who live in the north need to find ways to live that north that we will face. And that is a big challenge, because it's a challenge beyond understanding. It's to understand something we haven't seen, and then to find ways to live it. The positive thing about that is that indigenous peoples of the north and other northerners have been extremely robust before facing changes. So I'm sure you and your friends and your people will find solutions, but then they need to be enabled to do so.
Do you know, I've just, one of our professors at the University of Bremen has just helped families suing the EU for the climate change, for the CO2 in the atmosphere. And I've read that from other places. Do we know of any evidence that Northerners have sued government or industry or anyone for climate warming? I have no idea that happened. I know that the small island states do. There are several people who do this, but I'm not aware that anyone from the north is complaining at that level, seeking for the legal system. You're also not aware of that, right?
I know that Sheila Mukherjee was dreaming about doing it, but I don't know if it ever happened.
Alaskan youth have.
Alaska has?
Yes.
That's one way.
We once again have to bear in mind that, we talk about the calories of coal mines. What is happening now in Arctic will happen in Europe. So if you observe something, regardless if you are a scientist or just an ordinary person, if you are observing something happening dramatically in Arctic, you will have to have in mind that for sure will happen here too. This is a warning. The nature has a clear warning to the people of the world. Be aware of this is happening. Do something about it. And we have to do something about it here and now. So do some more research is one of the way of predicting things. But beside that, we have to do something about to reduce the carbon dioxide pollution we are doing in the nature. And once again, I mentioned this morning on the Alpha Vegan Institute that one of the most famous professors in the world, Noam Chomsky, he said to save the world from this global climate change is to listen to the indigenous people too, how to cope with the nature. Because we know we've been living with that and we can adapt it to the climate change. We have been doing that for thousands and thousands of years. Even almost the entire Arctic has been covered by ice. We have been surviving that and we've been adapting to that. I'm more afraid of how, like Germany and other countries in the southern part of the world will cope with that when it really happens, and it will come sooner than you expect. We have to be aware of that.
We must understand that our world, our Earth is very small, and all is connected, and we must find solutions on all levels. Local, state, regional and international level, and try to solve it with joint efforts, science, with local communities, with indigenous peoples, with political figures, and all of this, maybe all this.
It all comes together with a question that I had really for anyone here is what in involving more indigenous populations in science and research and education, what are the barriers? What things need to change to make that happen? Or what can we do to involve more indigenous peoples?
Well, I think it is all about the scientific method, where we need to be clear about what do we mean when we talk about doing research together, doing science together. As you said, there are several ways of involving people, citizens, no matter what religion, color, gender, whatever, in science. Not all of this is doing research together. There are various ways, and we need to be clear what is our toolbox, what are the methods, what's the scientific questions, what can be the outcome. So one empty space I find actually research, that's not so much natural science, but it's connected, research on the value systems of humans when it comes to environmental health. We have far too little understanding. We have a very industrial capitalistic view that nature needs to serve humans. That's the principle of our industry and economy. And I would like to learn from indigenous people how exactly to express the right to a healthy environment. Do you have that concept of health in the environment? How do you go about it? How do you preserve a certain richness of nature, so this entire value system of the right for nature to be good and healthy on its own without a human in it or using it. This is missing from our understanding of nature, and I would like to learn about it, how to express that really. This is what I'm needing.
Well, I could recommend the scientific book Alexander Lavrier has made with the close cooperation with the indigenous knowledge he did in Siberia, and I think it's just outside here too. So if you want to know how to cooperate with the indigenous knowledge, I can recommend that you talk with Alexander about it.
I could maybe go back to history again. In 1994, I was at the first ever Arctic Indigenous Ecological Knowledge Seminar in Iceland, organized by, or linked to CAF, and by the Indigenous Peoples' Secretariat of what is today the Arctic Council. At the time, people from natural sciences, normal people, came there and was simply laughing of the concept of Indigenous people carrying any kind of knowledge that could be useful for understanding the Arctic nature. Today, that's totally changed. And I think we should celebrate the fact that because of the polar year, maybe because of the Arctic Council, because of processes like this ministerial, all of them show that we understand there are other types of knowledges that goes beyond what we as natural scientists can somehow organize in our way to organize knowledge. You carry also methods of organizing knowledge which are extremely valuable. And today this is much less of a conflict line. Today maybe the issue is for you to find your traditional ways of organizing your knowledge to cope with the changes. One thing is climate change, but maybe a more dramatic change for most of the communities actually is globalization of economy, globalization of information, and that kind of thing. What kind of dream? I like the topic of this discussion about images of the North. So what kind of dream do a youth in Yakutia have when she grows up in a community? She chooses to go to school and is clever, go to university. And when I meet your students, your children and of your people, ask them what is their vision of their life. Same happens in Greenland. Too many of them dream of going abroad and establish a future elsewhere, because you cannot afford to lose more than half. And I'm really happy that University of Greenland is doing so well on this matter, but we need more strong northern leaders and invest in them at the same time. And I think the kind of the hard science part of the science community is today extremely prepared to welcome them into a dialogue and work with them. It's totally different than it was 25 years ago.
About some barriers between maybe with traditional knowledge and academic sciences. I think some of these barriers is a result of stereotypes. But we know that, for example, Alfred Wegener Institute have good science relations, scientific relations with, for example, with some academic institutes in Yakutsk, for example, Permafrost Institute and others, where our indigenous researchers works. And for example, Yakutia has a very good scientific base where the combine traditional knowledge and academic science. And the same situation, for example, in Sami territories, in Alaska, in Greenland, and we have enough scientists who combine these two branches of knowledge, traditional and academic. Maybe if we speak about cooperation, maybe this is a good example, cooperation.
One question I'm often thinking about is really the issue of preservation, conservation versus dynamics and adaptation. So from the Arctic Frontiers meeting, I was there too. The impression that I will not forget is the speech of the mayor of the city of Tromsø, who said you strange ecologists now invading our town, we don't want to be protected. We want to have better jobs, better livelihoods, we want to grow, and we do not need your support in protecting or conserving us and our landscape. So that was a very interesting opening, and I do feel a lot of this debate is ongoing with the people when you ask them. We have also to think about the issue that not only the cold is endangered, the heat too. We will have millions of people migrating from climate change. So the other thing I think is needed in research is that concept of the space, the new place, that is growing or shrinking depending on from which side you take, which tradition you look at.
Another aspect is, the drought. We experience drought anywhere. California did it some years back, and I mentioned to Grace on our telephone call, when George Bush Jr. was the president, he sent his ministers to the American continent to see and locate where there was some water reservoirs. And after that, there was a report saying that it was 10 years, more than 10 years ago, he said, now we're going to war. We start wars for oil. Within 2 decades, we'll start wars for water. So it is. This also indicates the distress need we have now for action. I'm not trying to be pessimistic. I'm very optimistic because I believe the humankind will survive by working together. Like in science, we are talking about that we should collaborate about science. So Tromsø is not working on the same issue like Alfred Wegener is doing. But if they are doing it together, I'm sure that they will improve a result that is usable for the rest of the world. We have to cooperate. It is extremely important. We are seeing it every single day, and I think I mentioned that United Nations make a report saying in 2025 there will be a distress need for all water for around 2 billion people on Earth. So we have to do that.
I have the experience now of the last weeks how the ministries of the world were trying to formulate a declaration which they can sign on Friday. And as you said, they can fix it. I can tell you, we scientists are working very well together. No problem, doesn't matter where you come from. It is different in politics. It is much more different in politics. And you see the national interests coming through. And like the US didn't want to have any mentioning of climate change. I mean, looking at our discussion, it's impossible, but at the same time, they wanted to have it eliminated, so that you have to choose some very diplomatic language. Other countries have other problems. I don't want to go into detail. But what I'm saying is, we may all agree here, you should not be fooled. Politicians don't necessarily agree on the same level. And that's why I think we need to actually put an example for peaceful cooperation in the Arctic by saying it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter which political, gender, racial background you have. We want to work together and we can really do it. We give the example of peaceful cooperation in the Arctic. I think this is something very important we have to do to show the way also for politicians.
Yeah, I would like to follow Karin's message because I think this is extremely important. And also interesting observation, you Arctic Together, Dias and others were very engaged in the negotiations for the science agreement for the Arctic as observers, outsiders. We were not countries, we were some organization. And we were much welcomed into that discussion. And finally there was a place where the governments actually were able to agree. And they wanted the Arctic to be the place for this kind of collaboration. So when they disagree on many other things, they are able to agree that they want peoples and science and researchers and education to have peaceful collaboration in the Arctic. And that's a really good sign, and we should seize the opportunity and use it, as Karen says.
But I often think also that we have the right as scientists, I mean, this is our system and our values, and I would not care about single countries who want to refuse that word climate change appears. The truth is above politics in that regard. We have currently an ongoing problem in Germany as well, with a new roundtable where some ministries don't want the word climate change. So it's not worthwhile to point only fingers on the US, it's happening in a lot of countries that we have to fight for that. So I have decided that I will not give up on any of this, and I will rather have some not sign than not telling the truth. And that's what I would recommend to the entire process. Speak up and don't care if it's like the 100% signatures. It's important that the majority trusts in the words that we speak as scientists, and that goes much above the politics.
Well, actually we can also see the example, I think it was last week at the Bundestag, they were talking about to prohibit diesel cars. And if you look at how much effort, both economically and by staff, doing lobbying for EU and for decision makers, we have to be aware of that lobbyism. It has a tremendous impact in the effort we are doing here as a scientist and us living in Arctic. We are fighting against financial, extremely strong industry. And I think sometimes my former colleagues in politics is easier to convince when there's some money behind it, unfortunately. This is a challenge we also have to be aware of. It is, there's time for diplomacy, and there's time for facts, and there's also time to be frank and honest and straightforward when we're talking about such issue like climate change and how big impact it has to our daily life.
The economic side of it reminds me of something that I wanted to ask about earlier, and that was the idea of creating more opportunities for people who live in the Arctic and in the North. I think a number of the presentations earlier were speaking about kind of this, to some extent, brain drain happening in some areas of the North where maybe bright students go to university, don't come back to their hometowns. What can happen there, or what needs to happen to create more opportunity or to keep a lot of these young people interested in these areas?
Can I try? First of all, we have to remember that the Arctic, whatever point on Earth you draw a line to the north, the area north of that is more resource-rich per capita than any other part of the world. And already today, if that was a country, whichever line you draw, the existing mines, the existing oil field, the existing whatever businesses make that the richest country of the world. The fact that it doesn't feel like that for you or anyone else is that one is centralized to capitals. It's not because the resources isn't there. So the Arctic is extremely resource-rich. There is a way for you to be independent. There is a way for Yakutia to be independent. Reality don't necessarily know that. That's a different case. So it is possible to make economic futures in the north. But then, what is the answer? It was asked here a question about mining. I'm a geologist, I love finding minerals and so on. But not every community can have a mine. Not every community should have oil field. We need other resources in the Arctic, and there is this resource we always forget about the Arctic, and that's the mind, the brain of people, the power of the mind, and now we have all the technology. You can live already now, start to get connectivity in Yakutia. In Greenland, you get starting to get the cable around and so on. It is possible to have a modern kind of life in smaller northern communities. And we need to stimulate those who want to explore that other kind of economic futures. And then I would say one thing to the science community. We do something wrong when we have the big calls for research money, because they are put together in a way that a small little research group in a northern community in Greenland would have no chance on earth in hell to ever get those money, because, sorry to say it, Avi and others will win always. And we need to make funding schemes that also make it possible for those smaller places to have to build the researchers in partnership with you and others. And that has to do with the mechanism that we create for funding distributions.
I fully agree to that. And I think one thing which is difficult for us, having been involved in all these development of big projects, to whom should we talk? I mean, whom should we invite? We don't know who would be the right partner in Greenland, in Siberia or somewhere else. Maybe in Alaska it's better organized, or in, I don't know, in North Canada. But we don't have the network. And I think this is something which we need to develop. And then, when you develop a science plan, don't develop a science plan and then go around and look for partners, but invite them right from the start. And so I would be very happy if we have a good network to say, we want to now work on atmospheric science, and we need something on air pollution, and which group would be willing and would be able to actually join. I think it would be really welcome.
I think you are pointing to an extremely essential point for that kind of problems, and Arctic actually is ready to help you with an answer to your question. On many, we're not perfect yet, but we will be one day, hopefully, in finding those groups you need. Yes, you have a very, very good question. You shall not first define your project and then find a token Arctic person. You need to find the right Arctic person to help you formulate the question and develop the plan. And we shall try to be better at helping you and others.
We will keep you to that.
I want to return to issues with connections between business, policy, research. Maybe one of the solutions must be the ethic of researchers, because every researcher must think about for what aims, for what purposes can be used the results.
I think that's a really great point, and one that, I mean, certainly many people in the room here are potentially responsible for, or would have some say in thinking about in the future. I have one last question for everyone on the panel before we start taking questions from the audience, and that is, what do you wish politicians knew about the Arctic?
I would like Trump to remember that his grandfather was making the first money in the family on the Arctic Inn, and therefore he should care for the Arctic.
I love it.
I would hope they understand that this is a unique place that has no second on Earth, so we cannot lose it. As you perfectly rightly said, this place is shrinking away, and there is no replacement, and it's our generation that steals it from future generations, and that I would like politicians to understand, and I mean everything, including the deepest depths of the Arctic. That is a deep ocean. We have been there, we've looked at the life, we know it's unique, and their space is shrinking.
Yes, on COP21 in Paris, the former Secretary General of the United Nations said extremely clear, there is no planet B. We simply have to remember that we have no planet B. So we have to be aware of and taking care of our own. It is about our future. It is about our children's future, it is about our grandchildren's future. So it is extremely important that we give them, we are just, in our traditional Greenlandic way, we say that we are just borrowing the land from our children. So we have to be able to face them, be able to look at their eyes when we are giving it back to them. So it is not a destroyed earth we are giving. It has to be as clean as possible when we are giving it to them. So it is extremely important that we know it regardless, you know. Even politician is just human being like anyone else. And it has to be responsible in any decision making they're doing, also regarding climate change.
Well, I would like them to know that the changes happening in the Arctic will affect them, will affect all the other countries as well. So they cannot close their eyes and they cannot say it doesn't matter in Spain, Italy, somewhere else. It will affect them all, and that's why they need to pay attention, not only what's happening in the Arctic, but to our own work and our own way of life.
And I want to say that a pity, for example, for Russia case, that geopolicy start to work more and more big role in Arctic issues. We must remember that, or as earlier we say, that only politicians create these borders, but they must remember that we live in one world, in one earth.
Thank you. And now we do have time for some questions from the audience, and I ask that you, when we call on you, please introduce yourself and state your affiliation. And if you have a comment rather than a question, save it for the socialization afterwards. And yes, we have one question already in the back.
Okay, my name is Halldór Johansson. I'm from Iceland. I'm a director of something called the Arctic Portal. I have many hats now. I'm the cameraman. I'll make it a bit of a comment and then a question. You know, I live in the north, and I'm born in the north, and I had the privilege of going abroad to one of the best universities in the world, and I went back home. I left my home at exactly 3:39 this morning, and I was in Berlin by noon. I mean, this is the magic, and this is what it's all about. We need transportation, we need the infrastructure, we need the connectivity. If we have that, everything is open for us. But believe me, all you young people here, it's a privilege. It is a true privilege to live in the north. It's not a chore, it's a privilege. And we have to remember that. Seriously, it is. And we have actually at the Arctic Portal quite many foreigners working now and have been working over the years. And most of them actually have resided in the country because they don't want to leave. So if we can provide the opportunities, and they are mostly through connectivity again and good transportation, then anything can happen. And another thing is, towards Russia, I mean, I've been working a lot with your good colleague Mikhail Pogadayev from the Northern Forum, and I know, of course, that you have issues with building tourism. It has not been mentioned yet, I think. Tourism in Iceland, for you, those of you who don't know, we have a population of 346,500, whatever, as it is now. But this year, tourism is probably going to reach 2.5 million. So it's incredible how it has been going up. And it was announced on radio yesterday that it's now bigger than aluminum and fishing together. So, but it's also fragile, and it's something that could go the other way around, because we also learned yesterday that we are now the most expensive country of the world. So how do we deal with that? Because when you're small, you're very fragile. How can we stabilize? We did not want to become a part of the EU. But I'm just wondering how these small communities can actually stabilize, because that's the most important thing. Karin and I, we've been working together on the European Polar Board and data management issues, etc. And we're always looking, like we're talking long term, but we tend to be thinking very short term. So it's like, I'm just wondering how we can change that. And what do you see in the Arctic in 20 years from now? Especially in Greenland and Yakutia.
I think the looking to the future question is one I'd like to hear an answer from everyone about. And the mention of tourism is also very interesting because there's a lot of discussion around the world of over-tourism, and as the global middle class grows, they want to see the same places, they want to see Amsterdam, they want to see London. Someday that could be Greenland. It's already Iceland, of course. So I'm curious also to hear everyone's thoughts on the potential effects of tourism or mitigating the effects of tourism. Maybe in Greenland, have you already seen an increase in tourism?
Well, not as much as they do experience in Iceland, but it is a potential industry we are looking at also. But you know, it's again, you have to look at the need. What do the world need? We are quite unknown as a tourism destination, but again, I see other opportunities, like we have a tremendous amount of water we can give to the rest of the world, and the tourism can also be increased, but you know, it is also something we have to have in consideration when we're talking about the climate change here. The carbon dioxide contribution you do when you are increasing the tourism, you're also increasing the pollution, and you don't do that when you are selling water or when you are exporting water to other countries. So it's a balance we have to be in thinking about. And regarding Greenland, from 20 years from now, I see an independent country that is in close cooperation with the rest of the world, and being a positive example for the rest of the world regarding holistic industry and holistic way of living in balance with the nature. Thank you.
And about Yakutia case, I don't afraid from tourism. The territory of Yakutia is so big and so few tourists in our territories. Maybe the main tourist is a science tourist. And maybe it's a challenge maybe for Scandinavia or Iceland, I don't know, but for our territory, so huge territory, so big amount of expenses, transport expenses for it. It's more easier, for example, from Yakutsk come to here, to Berlin. It's more easier and more cheaper than go from Yakutsk, for example, to our local communities in the north. And maybe this is the main barrier, and that's why I don't afraid this amount of these tourists.
As long as Ryanair doesn't start doing a route from it, you'll probably...
I think everyone in Chesky would be happy with Ryanair go to Chesky every day. That's far away in the northeast of Yakutia. As a almost ambassador for Yakutia, I would recommend you all to go for travels in Yakutia. Just to make that extremely clear, it's a fantastic part of the world. So is Greenland, and so is of course Iceland. And I think you have a point that it might be good for most communities that the number of anthropologists per family is lower than the number of tourists per family.
No anthropologists dashing here.
No, I mean researchers there. It is useful to have tourism. But your question is about economic stability. And I think we have a big challenge to make that happen, but there are, like reindeer herding, another project on Mikael Pogodaya. When you can make reindeer meat from Yakutia or anywhere else in the Arctic become a luxury food, exclusive food on the world market, it still is a small portion of the world consumption, that you can actually keep a stable high price for that product worldwide. That means if you can manage the process of making that market happen, then you have some stability. If you are able, with your fantastic crayfishes from Akureyri, to make us all buy that every day, every year, you have a stable income. So that is maybe the challenge, is to use those kind of natural resources in addition to the tourism on a low pace. And as long as one is a little fraction of the global market, one are not as in a way sensitive to the bulk market as one would be if you try to be the big deliverer of something.
Well, I think we have to consider the rich resources in the Arctic that will be attractive to a lot of countries around the world, and we have to make sure that these resources are not being used in an irresponsible or non-sustainable way. So that's one thing, looking 20 years or so into the future, how do we deal with these resources? And I would say, being a biologist, the biological system is stable when it grows slowly. If you grow fast, you are much likely to bloom and bust. So I think anything to do with using these resources and the economic system, if you take it step by step and not too fast, but on a slow and considerate way, that will be probably a good advice for future development. Same applies to tourism, if it goes steady and the development of infrastructure can follow along, that's okay, but not if you suddenly have millions of people flooding the country because it suddenly becomes fashionable, then you can't deal with it.
And Anja, what do you think Arctic research will look like in 20 years?
Yeah, I really hope that we continue on the path to strive for systemic understanding. As we started out, and as was said many times, the changes in the north, the loss of ice of the cryosphere affects the entire planet in very dramatic ways. Also in those places where not 4 million people, but 40 million more live. Look at Indonesia. Again, I come from Brazil. We had a school in one of the most amazing, unique Atlantic rainforests, and when you talk to the young people there who are studying, they can tell the same story of their environment as we do for the Arctic. They see it shrinking away. They know it's wrong, it has repercussions, because the forests on Earth are at the moment our only big natural carbon sink, the forests and the wetlands, and we need to fix it everywhere. So I wish for science to be in the leadership role of an open, shared, international, collaborative environment with clear ethics and values of sharing and openness, and also the drive for the truth. It's needed for the rest of society to be able to learn from us and our ethics. That is really badly needed. When we look around, it's my biggest hope that I have that for some time where there is a vacuum in politics that we are facing everywhere for taking the environment serious in our space and Earth, that we can become more political for some time, more loud, more clear about our message, and try at least to fight for our right for a good environment and the right of future generations for a good environment.
Do we have any more questions from the audience? We are absolutely open. There's one over there.
Rolf Teigler, die Hochschule für Medien. I have a question to the scientists. When I heard Thorsten Sachs and show us his data, I was thinking, do we do enough to show these things to the people? I mean, politicians have usually been elected in most countries, but do the people do enough? Do they know enough about your work? That's the question.
I think they don't know enough about our work, and partly it's our own fault. We are not speaking a language which they would understand, and we are trying to be too complicated. That's one thing, and they are hearing other things from other people, yeah, and you know, you have to make sure that they don't are torn between should we listen to these or should we listen to those. You have to get a message which clearly says what they are saying is not correct for this and this reason, and I tell you what everyone in science believes. So IPCC is a very good example, and it has caught the attention of politicians. As far as Arctic change is concerned, I think this is still something where we need to become better. And Thorsten Sachs has shown the evidence. I mean, you can't deny it. At the same time, people still do it.
I absolutely believe in images, so for my background as a deep sea researcher, we try to show that it's not a desert, the deep sea, but it's full of fantastic life and how this life works. And we try also to show the way we work, the hopes that we have for our expedition, and especially for Mosaic, we will try also to go really beyond the way that science is presented. We forget often that people are fascinated with our enthusiasm for the work. We forget that people are fascinated with the hardship of going on long expeditions, because for us it's a pleasure. We fight to go for expedition, we want to be there, but other people have respect for a long month on a ship, or an Arctic camp, or staying in Yakutsk over the summer and away from the family. So to put the method, the space, and the people who are doing sciences, who are explorers of today, to put them more in the forefront as people who have an opinion, who explain, who show, who are open to discuss. This is what we really want to do for Mosaic. Teleconnection. You know that it is possible technically, maybe not yet around the North Pole, but you can have people, you can have kids look at us while we do our research and ask questions while we do our research, and I find that very powerful. So we hope that we'll really have a new way of presenting the image of science in the future.
From my opinion, your questions is like an appeal not only for scientists, it's appeal for media, it's appeal for politicians, and maybe this is an appeal for everybody, because everybody must be responsible for what's happening.
I think the root of your question, follow-up, was a question that was raised earlier. This issue about 99% of scientists says one thing and then somebody says something else. And this referred to a very fundamental moral dilemma, which linked to your point with how the media and science communicate to each other. Because if we simplify, we go into the trap of become fake news producers. Because there is a limits between simplifying and going into oversimplifying. And that's maybe a fundamental problem in science. And the majority is not an argument for truth in science. But in science we have a very good mechanism, and that's to falsify ideas. And I think if we had produced, let's say, a little Arctic falsifying commission, who has a job to basically take down all the lies about what is truth about science in the Arctic. So at least we can take away those ideas. Instead of fighting that our idea is right, we can say that thought is totally wrong. That we could do using science with absolutely confidence. And that would be maybe a very good strategy on this topic, and still continue to be true about the problem, or it's not a problem. That because of sun angles and other things, climate also changed for natural reasons. That is not the problem. We need to accept, we don't have a problem with that, but somehow somewhere between the scientific understanding and the communication in media, we end up with a situation that people have the understanding that we say that it's only man-made climate change that do exist. And that is not what the scientific community say. And there we go wrong, and we end up almost like a trap. And we shouldn't go there.
I just would like to say we have an example with where a scientific issue or an issue has really become very obvious, and that's plastic in the ocean. Yeah? And suddenly everyone talks about plastic in the ocean, and even the politicians find it terrible what's happening. And so in a way, we have to look at this example. Why was that so successful? I think this is a research question for the media. And use it, and it is images, as Anja said, it is images which have made people understand suddenly, wow, what's happening there. And we have a lot of good images in the Arctic. We just have to translate them into something which can be easily grasped and catches the emotion of people.
But I would like to also fight for the right of scientists to debate, to not agree, to falsify, as you say. I'm sometimes surprised, and often we get that question from the media, that we should have the same opinion, one voice, that science has to have the science itself is a system of sciences, right? It's not like one science. We can be scientists and not even talk the same language. We can be scientists from the same country, not talk the same language when we discuss systems. So, and that is our right, and that has always been held with science. So the needs that I'm often asked, and we have this debate about politics, that we are suddenly the ones who have to convince the last idiot on earth that climate change is real, is not my scientific task, really not. And it will not happen because there will always be idiots. We know that. You know, today I had an interview this morning, and I said, because they asked me this again and again, and I told them, you know, there was a time when scientists believed it will be the end of the world when women learn to read and go to university. It's also not true that scientists are always right and the good ones. It's not true. So we should not forget the history, we should not forget our debates and the conflict, and we should not forget that the normal citizen understands complexity, right? They all marry. That's a complex problem, to marry and spend the rest of your life with one person. And we do this again and again, right? And so this is absolutely fake news that science is responsible to convince everyone that we have one voice, that there's this one answer. It's not. Life is complex, humans are complex, and it's not our task to convince idiots. Really not.
Just a brief comment about we have to have in mind that politicians are voted, and so Rolf is actually putting up a very important issue. You know, if we can, the scientists can convince the public, and the politician knows that they have this knowledge. They might be able to change the idea of how to solve the climate change. So it is actually a very important issue we're putting up here.
Are there any final questions from the audience before we let you go and eat lots of delicious things in the foyer? I don't believe so. Everyone is much too hungry for this. No, but I think we've raised some amazing points this evening, and I especially love the idea of scientists being a good example for politicians of collaboration and cooperation. And I hope that that's what everyone leaves here with, is an idea that we can collaborate and make some change happen, even if we can't convince the last idiot on earth that they should perhaps listen to scientists rather than a random YouTube channel. But I would love to thank all of the panelists here. Let's give them a round of applause for all of their... Thanks, of course, also to the Bremen Landesvertretung for hosting us this evening, and Avi for organizing this evening. I've enjoyed myself very much, and I hope that you have too. Thank you for being here with us or for watching on the live stream, and please stick around, join us in the foyer for drinks and food, and thank you and have a good night.